I'll do you one better.
Oh, look at that.
And I don't know where this came from, but it's signed as well. It says, "This is my first."
That's it. Oh, you got it, Jack. That's the one.
Yeah,
That's pretty cool.
We have you signed in twice, Jack. How was that?
I'm good.
It's
Let's
your
not,
evil twin.
let's not mess with it in case he disagrees. Good. It's just
Well, we've lost Mike, though. At least I don't see Mike on
no,
here.
Mike is right there.
I see Mike.
I see Mike.
Oh,
Is Mike
okay. All right,
talking?
I got Mike back.
Okay.
Person, hello. I'm gonna
There he is.
just so we can say hello to our Facebook people. Mary, hello, welcome. Just double checking, we are live on
Okay.
Facebook, so we are okay. Let me go ahead and bring this forward, and we should be good.
All right. Thank you very much, Pat. Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, wherever you are. We have put together an event because today, well, not today, but this year is the 50th anniversary of the publication of the Mediterranean Caper. So, Dirk, you know more about this than I am. You want to give us a little background?
Well, it's actually the second book that my father wrote. So
So I was wrong already.
well, but you were right because it was the first one that was published. So it was the second manuscript. His first one got no traction. It was called Pacific Vortex. But after he had become more successful, they went back and published it later on. So it hit the rejection pile initially, and so he went on to a second one, Mediterranean Caper, and that was his first novel that was published. It was only published in paperback, 1973. I think they published about 5,000 copies of it. But he was very excited because it was nominated for the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Mystery Thriller in 1973. And I remember he went back to New York City with my mother, all excited, and he didn't win, but it was a nice feather in his cap for his first published novel. And of course, it introduced the ongoing characters of Dirk Pitt and Al Giardino in the story. And here we
That's
are.
very cool. Actually, they had, I'm not sure if they still do, but they had a category for best paperback original as well as for best first novel. So, it might have, I don't know which one it qualified for, but there has subsequently been a small, well, Dirk, you tell us, because Mayday is the title of the British edition.
Right. Yeah. We were talking earlier. In England, they published it under the title Mayday. And I don't know the story behind that, why they changed from the Mediterranean Caper, but Mayday is probably a cooler name. But that certainly probably does cause some confusion to readers. They pick up a book called Mayday they haven't seen before, which in fact is the Mediterranean Caper. And this was a hardcover edition that was published later by James Cahill, but I believe the original in England was also in paperback.
Right. And so we were cleaning house. We actually went to our storage locker, which we definitely need to do more often. We found some copies of Mayday that Clive had signed back in 2004. So Dirk is holding one, and we have a few left. And I will also say that we found a few copies of Built to Thrill, which was, Dirk, am I right that was the first book on the car collection?
Yes, it was. So there were two books, but that was the original one. Coffee table book featuring photos of Clive's car collection in Colorado. And most of the cars are pre-war. We sort of ended up splitting the books pre-war versus post-war his collection, because he's got a lot of 1930s cars and then quite a few from the 40s and 50s. But yeah, that was the first, and features probably some of the nicest cars that he had in his collection.
They are wonderful. Fortunately, he signed all of our copies there, so we're in great shape. If I remember right, that was a very long-term project. Clive wanted to do it, and because it was expensive, because of all the color printing and all the photography, the whole bit, there was a lot of pushback in terms of publishing it. And I don't think that they published an enormous number of copies, if I recall that correctly.
I couldn't tell you what the numbers are, but yeah, it wasn't a wide release, I think, because Putnam obviously it wasn't geared towards, I think, coffee table books in terms of art, the typical work. So I think there, like you said, there was some resistance to putting it out, but I think it ended up doing very well.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's like a ghoster in the past to suddenly find books signed by Clive. Now I went to my personal library, and I am holding a copy of Black Wind, signed by Dirk and by Clive. And why is that, Dirk?
Because that was the first book that I co-wrote with my father. and that was probably what 2004, I guess, or so. So
It's been 20 years.
it has been almost. Yep. Time
I'm just
flies.
looking, you're right. It says copyright 2004. So actually, this is the 20th anniversary year then for Blackwind and for Dirk writing with his dad. And I remember well, Graham, I'm trying to remember. I don't think you'd been writing with Clive then, but I remember that we went out to dinner after Trojan Odyssey came out. And he said to me that he really loved going on publishing his adventures, but they'd gotten bigger and bigger. And he didn't think, because he was aging and he could do all the heavy lifting himself anymore. And he wondered how it would go if he co-wrote with somebody. And I think, Dirk, weren't you or was it Paul? Had Paul already started writing?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Paul and actually Craig Durgo had started, I think, the first with the Organ Files,
Okay.
and he wrote 2 of those, and then Paul came in on the Pneuma Files. But yeah, my memory's a little foggy on the chronology there, but I think those were both going about that time.
So we're all gathered here today because, let's see, Mike Maden in the cap over there, Graham Brown doing that thing, and Jack DuBrul down on the bottom. This is the team that is carrying the Cussler verse, as we call it, forward. Missing from this is Dirk, who's missing? Let's let you talk about that.
Fargo series. So we're one short right now in terms of the Fargo, and we're working towards that. We're a little behind schedule. We have the Serpent's Eye was in progress, and we don't have a publication date yet on that. So we had a little slippage, and we're working through that. But hopefully we'll have the Fargos back in action here before too much longer.
So coming up, there will probably be 3 books sometimes in 2024, if you guys all behave. We'll find out. Right. So let's see. How should we do this, Dirk? Do you want to? You're now sort of the whole center of the thing. So
I guess part of it is we're talking about Dirk Pitt as well as the Mediterranean Caper, and I guess I just wanted to throw out to the other guys maybe how Dirk Pitt has influenced the protagonist in their stories, and maybe how Clive personally has as well. Now, that's a tougher question for Mike, obviously, but for Jack and Graham, how do you see Dirk Pitt's influence in Kurt Austin and Isaac Bell, and/or Clive's personal influence on those characters as you guys write them today?
Oh boy. I mean, for me, and this is something that Graham and I had talked about, is how towards the end of the story, Dirk Pitt is always the smartest guy in the room. He's figured something out that the reader had a clues to, but didn't put together. But Pitt did. And like reading Mediterranean Caper, he's in the sea cave. The bad guys have him right where they want him, and he turns the tables entirely because he knew everything going on, way in advance. And that was such a clever trick that Clive pulled, and did it again masterfully in Raise the Titanic. That I was inspired, for like my Philip Mercer character, and again for the Organ Files. That the main character is just that tiny bit smarter than everybody else, but not arrogant about it, so that it turns the reader off. But the reader's like, "Oh, that guy is so cool." That Pitt has stuck with me ever since reading Raise the Titanic in 8th grade. And I remember after reading that, I begged my parents to take me to a used bookstore, and I picked up Iceberg and Mediterranean Caper right away. Loved them.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things that definitely, I think, grabs everybody in these books and in fiction in general. If with Dirk Pitt, you always got this sense that he was one step ahead of things, even when he knew he hadn't figured it all out yet. And that, as a reader, that was always like, okay, I want to see if I can figure out what he's figuring out. Because you knew Clive was giving you the clues through Dirk, and you wanted, just like Sherlock Holmes or whatever, you kind of wanted to put it together before the hero. And that definitely had stuck with me all through my writing, especially working on the Numa files. You know, the hero, at least the way I see it, the way it seems to be written in these books, you know, when it comes to the finale or the climax of the story, we never want to see the hero overpower the villain. We never want to see the hero just pull the gun and shoot the villain. The hero always has to outsmart the villain.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't end that way, it's not a very satisfying conclusion. So, you know, that definitely is something that I think stays with anybody that reads these books and anybody that works on them, is you're always trying to figure out a way to create a villain that's powerful and intelligent, but Dirk or Kurt or Juan Cabrillo or Isaac Bell, they have to actually be one step even smarter.
Yeah.
And I want to say this, since we're kind of talking about Mediterranean Caper specifically, because it's interesting, because I've read it three times. I read it a long time ago, but well before I ever met Clive, well before I even started writing, you know, and I was like, what a great adventure. Like, made me want to go to like Greece and wander around the Mediterranean and meet beautiful women on the beach and all that stuff. And just have a great, you know, a great adventure where you don't know what's happening next. And the next time I read it was shortly after I started working with Clive. And the interesting thing for me was, the second time that I read it, I suddenly couldn't see Dirk Pitt as anybody else but Clive Cussler. Like, once you got to know Clive and then you read Dirk and the lines that he's delivering and the way he's reacting to things, it's just, you're just, at least for me, I'm just seeing Clive in all of those scenes. You know, and then rereading parts of it again before we set up this Zoom, I was also struck by, you know, there's this sort of, I think Stephen King said writing is like time travel, and he writes at some point and you might read it years later, and that's the only moment that the entire process is complete. And picking this book up again and reading it for the first time in the last, I think probably 12, 13 years, since whenever I first started working with Clive, there was a little bit of a time travel feeling. I was kind of reminded of that moment of like, I'm working with Clive Cussler, you know, I have to go through all these books again. I have to like feel this emotion for these characters again. And it brings you right back. And even though all of our older books sometimes feel a little bit connected to their time period and maybe a little bit dated, I think that's what's good about it, because suddenly you're back. For me, I'm back when I'm first working with Clive, but I'm also back when I first started reading adventure books. And even though you probably couldn't write a book like Mediterranean Caper today, because people would want it to be bigger and longer and more complex, I love that these books are still out there and they're part of the canon. And I tend to go back and read those more than I reread any of the new ones. So that's kind of how it works for me.
I thought it was interesting when you talk about seeing Clive there, because I wrestle with that all the time. Not wrestle with it, but it's just kind of inspiration for me working on the books, because I see so much of my father in Pitt, and say the dialogue, kind of the attitude, and just some of the behavior. It's tough to kind of draw the line between the fictional character and the old man there, as he was in his younger days. And so it's kind of a fun inspiration, I guess, in that regard, to think back about his persona and his character, and how that kind of influenced Pitt and the other protagonists that he created as well.
So, Mike, stepping into this without having actually written a book with Clive, how's it been for you?
Well, I regret never having been able to work with Clive. First of all, on behalf of the group, Clive was certainly a veteran, and I've got a 91-year-old father-in-law who, former wounded combat decorated Marine. Happy Veterans Day to him and all the veterans. Certainly,
Amen.
Many fans of all the series. So thank you all for your service, certainly. But yeah, I wish I'd worked with Clive, but I feel like I kind of know him. I did read somewhere where he said he consciously built the Dirk character, the Dirk Pitt character off of himself. But he didn't have to say that. It's so clear. I mean, I sort of know him by reading Dirk Pitt. There's just no question. And I think, the classic writers are the ones that stay with us and resonate with us, are the ones that, have a true and authentic voice, and that sense of not like literary style, but I know who this man is because of the way he writes and what he says and what's important to him. I get the jokes. I can just imagine what Clive must have been like. I think Mediterranean Caper, it just makes me laugh. The Al Giordino and Dirk interactions are just hilarious. It was a buddy cop movie before those things were popular. There's no question in my mind that Juan Cabrillo is cut from the same cloth as Dirk. I definitely appreciate what Graham was saying before. Juan's superpower, like Dirk's, is not his fists or the fact that he can, do these other things like flying planes or whatever. It's his intellect, and it's absolutely true that the hero of a story can't have overwhelming power. It's always a story of power and status. And if the hero has way more power than everybody else, then he's not really heroic. In fact, he can almost seem cruel. It's the villains who have too much power and are cruel. And so in the case of Mediterranean Caper, Dirk can be shot and he can be unarmed, but he still has his wits. And that's his superpower. And that's how you know he's going to win. And that certainly comes through for Juan Cabrillo in the Organ Files series as well.
All right, let me say, along these lines, Dirk and I are going to be doing an event, a live event at 6:00 at the Poison Pen for the new Dirk Pitt, which is called The Corsican Shadow. And there's a moment in which I was really concerned that Dirk was going to blow up the Eiffel Tower, but instead they all end up going into the Seine, the River Seine, in a truck, and anybody but Dirk Pitt and Al Giordino would have drowned. But because they're experienced divers and all the rest of it, they don't display necessarily superhero powers, but they have enough superhero power that they get out of the truck and swim up to the surface and don't actually die. So, you do have to give them some extraordinary capabilities, don't you, Dirk, in order to make the book work?
Well, he was clever because he obviously wanted to build the stories around the sea and have a hero that was capable underwater. But then at the same time, he made him a retired major in the Air Force. So he had pilot capabilities. He can fly planes, he can fly helicopters, and he can fly submersibles or pilot submersibles and boats and everything else. So, and then of course, he's a marine engineer, I guess, by background. So I think he did a smart job in terms of kind of building in these skills and capabilities into his background that enables him to do these things. Driving a truck full of explosives into the Seine. I don't know if anybody's got that background, but you have to give them a little impetus there to get things like that done. But
so Clive started really writing on his own. I never forget that he came from advertising. And in fact, his most famous jingle was one that sticks in my head to this day because it was I'm pretty sure it was Clive that wrote it. Wasn't it the Ajax cleanser commercial? I can still sing it. Ajax, the floating cleanser, floats the dirt right down the drain. When I was a kid, that played on the radio and everything all the time. It's always kind of in the back of my head when I think about Clive. And Ajax is kind of perfect if you think about it, right? If you think about the Greek character, it's almost like it foreshadows Dirk Pitt.
Well, and it was the White Knight too, wasn't there, in the ads at one point? That's the ads I recall as a kid in the '60s. Was the White Knight on the horse went charging in with the cleanser to clean the house, I guess. So
maybe, but I've always thought that coming from the advertising background certainly had an influence on Clive's style. How he wrote and how he approached both in terms of sentence structure and pace and all those things. Because in advertising, you have very little time to get your message across.
Yeah, and look at the visuals. I think like in Mediterranean Caper. He opens with this crazy scene of Pitt and Giordino flying in a Catalina PBY over Greece and coming to save the day when a World War I Albatross attacks the Air Force base there on Greece. So he had that kind of visual sense to grab the reader right off the bat with something maybe a little outlandish even. And I think he carried that through in all of his stories.
Pretty
I think too,
remarkable.
he knew how to sell ideas.
Yeah.
These outrageous, raise the Titanic. I bought it hook, line, and sinker. It was just so well presented in the story that, oh, they have to do this. Okay, I like it.
You're right. He could pitch something that seems crazy. I mean, forget the story right now, but he had a sea serpent in one story, right? Fighting battling was it a whale, I think, that was believable. And one of the stories, Shockwave, thank you. And then he had a moon base on one of the other ones.
Cyclops.
Cyclops, thank you, Jack. But on the face of it, they seem outlandish, but the way he melded it into the story, like you say, you bought it hook, line, and sinker. It just was carried a realism to it that I think a lot of people couldn't pull off.
So, Graham, you mentioned, being inspired to go, I think it was you, inspired to go to Greece. But one of you just said reading the Mediterranean Caper makes you want to.
It sounded like a good idea after reading the Mediterranean Caper. It seemed like a place to go for adventures.
So it seemed to me, having spent all these years listening to Clive's fans, that the landscape of the book, where the adventure takes you, has always been a big plus for readers, something that really interests them. So what kind of a challenge is that for all of you in trying to find locations that are not necessarily repetitive of other? I know, Graham, you ran into, I think it was you, where you're going to write a book set in Egypt, but Dirk had already preempted you, or somebody had already preempted you.
That's happened a couple of times. I mean, there was one time I suggested a plot, and Clive was like, "Well, Dirk's kind of already doing that." And then there was another time I was like, "In this book, I want to blow up this hotel in Singapore. It's the one with the 3 towers and the big pool on the top,
Marina Sands."
Yeah, and Jack had already blown it up in the previous books. I'm like, what if they've just finished rebuilding it, and it just gets blown up again, and the general manager just quits? And Clive thought that would be funny, but he was like, "No, let's find something else." So, yeah, sometimes you can't even find something that we haven't blown up yet. I mean, I think Dirk's taken out the Panama Canal, right? Sounds like the Eiffel Tower almost went down this time.
Really worried.
There's not a lot of monuments we haven't touched yet.
Landmarks, yeah.
Their landmark survival may be a crucial element in reading the books, right? Will it make it? So, Mike, you're new to this. Have you had to read the whole canon in order to step up and write your series?
Well, certainly of the Oregon Files, for sure. I haven't caught up on all the other ones yet. Just read Jack's latest book. Well done, sir.
Thank you very much.
Enjoyed that very much. I love historical fiction anyway, so that was a lot of fun. Set in 1915, quite a year.
I think one of the best villain deaths I've ever come up with. That was thanks to Dirk's idea. That was just gruesome.
So yeah, so I guess Jack has found a way out of this conundrum. Since he's in 1915, he can do anything and beat us all to it.
Yeah, he's time traveled himself already back to a previous era.
Yeah.
The one standard I'm holding myself to in that is I can't have something that's not in the history books or within reason. So I can't blow up the Eiffel Tower in 1915 because it's still standing today.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it makes it a little tougher.
But what if it was secretly rebuilt and no one knew it? There you go.
There you
You're
go.
welcome. That's a freebie.
You're the best, Mike.
Virtual reality could enter into things at some point. That'd be sort of an interesting thing. What did I just read that said that something was using virtual reality to help people deal with some kind of for hoarding. That was it, that they're using virtual. So if you have a hoarder and you put them in virtual reality, then they can get rid of all the, the magazine piles and whatever it is. And then they can see what their residence would look like if it were decluttered. And the idea is then you could transfer to real life, take off the VCR and take it all away. And then you could put the virtual thing back on and still enjoy your clutter. And I was trying to figure out what you could do with that as adventure writers. Wouldn't that be interesting if you could find a way to use that?
I wonder if in the future we're going to have more interaction, that novels will eventually merge into the virtual reality world. I mean, some of the great storytelling is already taking place there, but I don't think the potential has been tapped yet at all.
Well, Graham's sort of our current expert on artificial intelligence. But yeah, I mean, you could see that the books would probably be able at some point to be instantly converted into some sort of virtual program. And I mean, we've got audio books, so I guess that would be the next step, right? You're experiencing the book rather than reading it, perhaps.
I mean, if they could do that, that would actually be that would be an outstanding add-on. I would all my favorite books I would definitely love to see and sense in 3D. But I will say this, it'll be different than what we've imagined in our minds.
Right.
And it'll be like that thing where you go back to like your old house and it's changed or something like that. Something your old school and it just doesn't seem right anymore. So maybe I don't want to do that. Maybe only for new books, but it's you're probably right. There probably will be a AI will read the book and just create like a 3D program and you can watch it like a movie, which that's just crazy. We might get there soon. Who knows?
Wow.
And not to be cliched about it, but everyone, I think we almost all agree, the movie's never as good as the book because our imaginations are better than the movie. So I think we'd hate to lose the reading experience. And I'm not a medical professional, but I've seen like Dr. Amon's brain scans of things, and you probably have too, but the brain is far more active when it reads than when it sits and experiences something like a movie.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, there's something deeply soulful, maybe even spiritual in the act of reading, as opposed to just sort of passively receiving someone else's imagination and vision. So,
I mean, Graham, you hit on it. Is again, when you read a book, it's yours. It's your interpretation. The character looks somewhat like the way it was written, but you fill in all the details.
Yeah.
It's like with my character, Philip Mercer. All he's got dark hair and gray eyes, and he's above average height. Everything else is in your mind.
Yeah, and the movie in your mind could be different than the movie in my mind, different than the movie in Dirk's or Mike's or Barbara's, or everybody's, got a little bit of a different vision because they carry their own experiences with them. And that's kind of what it makes it, unique. Everybody's got a unique read on the same book, which is kind of cool.
So, guys, is the truth universally acknowledged that every reader reads a different book because every reader brings their own, as you said, their own, experience, their own whatever it is. And for authors, sometimes I found over the years, it's really unnerving when somebody asks a question, which is very real to them about the book. And the author sits there and goes, did I really say that? Or, I mean, you can really see authors confounded sometimes by a reader's perception of what the book is. It could be really fun. So speaking of movies, now that Clive is not here to just absolutely go crazy, Dirk, are you at all, you're stepped into Clive's role here as managing all this. Do you see anything going to happen in the movie world, or is Clive's ban on that sacrosanct?
No, I mean, we'd certainly be happy to, for Apple or somebody to come in and do a bang up job of something. But we're just, treading cautiously on that front. Obviously things are in turmoil, I think, in Hollywood right now anyway, between the strikes and some of the financial difficulties. So I don't see anything in the near future happening on that front. But I think we'd all like to see quality interpretation of the books, all of the series, in some format or another. So I would hope at some point in the future that does happen. But at the moment, I have nothing can't report on anything in the works at the moment.
So have you taken on a role as kind of the, I don't want to say editorial role, but you're managing, in fact, the Cussler verse right now?
Try to, but it's a pretty easy job working with the caliber of these guys here. I mean, you couldn't ask for a better, more qualified, and more talented group of co-writers. So they're doing all
Thanks,
the work.
boss.
They are doing well. I have a question for Jack. Jack, you have written in two different Cussler verse universes. So was it easier for you to, transition from one to another, or how did that work for you?
Oh boy. Stepping in the organ files was really easy for me, coming from the Philip Mercer. Going to the Isaac Bell, I'd never done historic fiction before, so that was tricky. But for me, it's really been driven by the plots I came up with. When I had the opportunity to write the prequel to Raise the Titanic, it didn't matter to me how difficult it was going to be to do that. I had to write that book. But at the time, I also told Clive, I am not a mystery writer. I'm a thriller writer. And so my stories are going to be less mystery the way Justin Scott had done them, and more the adventure. So that made it easier for me.
You want to call Pat and see if we have any questions from the Facebook audience? I'm not sure where he disappeared to.
All right, I'm going to step away because I don't either.
While you do that, have any of you, I mean, right now we know what you're writing. We know you're writing Numa, and we know you're writing Isaac Bell, and we know that you're writing the Oregon Files. How would any of you feel about introducing a whole new line, or abandoning one and writing another one? Would that be something of interest?
I had approached Clive years ago about kind of a Dirk Pitt guy. He's wealthy. He has his own like Oceanographic Institute with a research ship, things like that. But at the dawn of World War II.
No.
So you can have the Japanese as villains, you can have Germans as villains. At the time, like technology, some new stuff was coming, the early jets, early helicopters, things like that. And he said, Jack, good idea. Go write that.
And what happened to it? Where is it?
That was it. I never did it.
Oh, you disobeyed a direct order?
I did.
It's too bad. That sounds like a good book.
So,
I stole a couple ideas from it that made it into the Oregon Files.
Dirk, the question I asked was, at some point, would one of the writers want to write some different, start a new series or something, or maybe put an older one to rest? How do you all feel about that?
One thing might be fun is the precursors. If we do a prequel maybe to one of the series or two.
Yeah, I mean, origin stories are always good. They're big in Hollywood. Yeah. Maybe someone would want to see how Dirk Pitt became Dirk Pitt, or Kurt Austin, or, young Juan Cabrillo or something like that.
The CIA days.
Yeah, you mean that those kind of things could be pretty cool.
But then you'd all be writing historical fiction, which is great. What happened to Pat? Did he decide that we didn't want him?
I think we didn't have any real questions here as far as
okay. All right. Well, anything that anybody
I had a question.
sorry.
For Dirk. Did your dad ever have a Maybach Zeppelin?
No, he did not. And so that's one car that's absent from the collection. The other one that I would have preferred that he also had in the collection was the 427 AC Cobra that Pitt drove in a couple of the early books, and that would be one I would rather have. But no my collection either. So
I think that was Deep Six.
I think you're right. I think it had an appearance in another one as well. I think Deep Six. So yeah, we're missing a couple of the cars early on that he put in there. But
well, you got a few blank spots in the museum.
A few parking areas that are unoccupied. Right.
Well, there's not a lot of Maybach Zeppelins that hit the market, I think. But
that's true too.
What would one of those go for? Any idea?
I don't. They're so unusual. I think I was talking to Graham about there's a Hindenburg Museum, or I'm sorry, it's the Zeppelin Museum.
Zeppelin, yeah.
Friedrichshafen in Germany. Yeah.
Right. And they've got a car, they've got a Zeppelin in the lobby there, which is a nice big sedan, but you just don't see them. I mean, they're very, very rare automobiles. You don't see them on the market much. So the few that are around, I think, are probably in museums, but yeah, cool car for its day. Sure.
Well, I wish Clive were with us to enjoy the 50th anniversary of the Mediterranean Caper. We kept him a long time. And, it's wonderful, I think, that you all are able to continue writing, great for you, but also great for fans who love all this and, didn't want to see it disappear. Dirk and I were talking earlier today about there's a big thing of military thrillers and so forth going on at the moment, but not so many just adventure write. And I really think of Clive, that was the gift that he gave us, was that he could write adventure. I go back to H. Rider Haggard and King Solomon's Mines and, books like that were, I just think, they actually worked very well in the 19th century, when people were still exploring the world, you could imagine King Solomon's mines, for example. Nobody had found it. It's kind of harder today to figure that out. But do you think that, it's the adventure that is what really draws readers in? I mean, there's technical stuff in your books and you've had to adopt to modern weaponry and all the rest of it. But at the heart of it, is it the adventure?
I would say yes. I remember talking to the Clive, and his big inspiration was Alistair MacLean. That he had these characters. He didn't build his characters the way, but he had exotic locales, some interesting action set pieces that weren't just combat. They had to climb a cliff and swim a river and then just explore a cave. He really liked that kind of stuff, and that's kind of where he went with the Dirk Pitt series.
No, I think adventure is really key to the formula, and part of adventure to me is also fun. I laugh in Clive Cussler books. They're having a good time. They may have villains are about to destroy the world, no question, but they're having a good time. There's no question they're having a good time, and that sense of humor and that sparkle just comes out. And Dirk, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but if we're asking questions of Dirk, I've got one. I've heard the story, and maybe you have a different take on it. But can you remind people who don't know this story how your dad first got his first and only agent, Peter Lampeck, and how he got his books published? Because that to me is a classic Clive Cussler story. Everything you know about the man is in that story.
So Clive had completed, I think he had completed both manuscripts. I think he had already written Pacific Vortex, which he had tried to pitch and hadn't gone anywhere. And then I think he may have written the Mediterranean Caper. I think he had that as well too, but he didn't have representation. And I think he came to realize that he needed to have an agent. And back in 1966 or so, I think the William Morris Agency was one of the better known literary agencies in New York. But he had no contacts. He was working in advertising, and so using his deviousness, he wrote a letter. He came up with the name of an agent named Peter Lampeck, and he wrote a letter to him, and he said, "Dear Peter, I don't deal. I deal primarily with film works, but I ran across this young aspiring author I thought you might like to look at. He's got 2 manuscripts, or you should take a look at." And he signed it Charles Winthrop. Well, Charles Winthrop didn't exist. Clive used to live on the Winthrop Boulevard, I think, in Pasadena when he was a kid or something. But he used his father's return address. And so he sent this phony letter to Peter Lampeck, soliciting his own work under the name Charles Winthrop. And Peter Lampeck received the letter, and he looked at the manuscripts, and he didn't like the first one, but he thought the second one had potential, and agreed to represent Clive. So years went by before Clive could fess up, and he met with Peter in New York, and they went out to dinner, and he finally fessed up to his act, mischievous deed. And he said Peter broke out laughing. He said, "I received this letter from Charles Winthrop, and I thought it was some guy I met at a party when I had too much to drink. So he assumed it was legitimate." And proceeded to look at the work. So it all ended well for everybody, and obviously, but a sign of Clive's creativity, I guess, and in maybe a more devious manner.
That is your dad in a nutshell. It really is.
It's Dirk Pitt in a nutshell. It's Juan Gabriel in a nutshell. Yeah, I love that story.
Well, Clive had a wonderful sense of humor, and I think it takes a sense of humor to actually do something like that, not just chutzpah, but actual sense of humor. Because if it backfired, he'd have to laugh, right, rather than cry. see how that worked. Well, gentlemen, it's really been a pleasure. And I told Dirk has one, but we did I think it was his 80th birthday party. Yeah, we gave him a birthday party at the Arizona Biltmore. And in order to do it well, people, the family and all, gave us a whole lot of photos of Clive. And so we created this whole photo montage. And I still have it. And I was going to, I know I've given one to Dirk and his sisters, but I'm not sure I've given one to you guys. But it's really fun to take the little stick and plug it in and watch Clive and recognize how much of what he wrote was stuff that he really did do. I mean, it's amazing. So I'll get that to you. I'm sorry, I've forgotten. But I'm really pleased that we have it. And you know, there's Clive leading his best life and then turning it into fiction. I mean, it's just such a wonderful thing, 50 years, and we're still excited about it. What does that say? Great.
It was done right.
Yeah.
I know. Well, anyway, it's lovely to see you guys. I look forward to seeing you in person. I look forward to seeing Dirk in an hour and 15 minutes to talk about the Corsican Shadow. And those of you watching it, we will be streaming that event. So if you're not able to come to the store, you can carry on and watch the streaming version. So anyway, thank you all very much. Lovely to see you. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Bye.
Barbara, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks.
Appreciate
Thanks for
it.
having us.
Nice to see you guys.
Good luck tonight, Dirk.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Give him hell, man.
Break a leg.
Somehow the video got behind.